My name is Kate Kirkpatrick. I am the Tutorial Fellow in Philosophy at Regent's Park College, Oxford. Welcome to my exp. The question, what is existentialism, is a question that is still the subject of debate amongst philosophers today. On the one hand, you get very broad definitions of the category, which include thinkers from the 19th and 20th centuries primarily, so people like Kierkegaard or Nietzsche or Heidegger, as well as the French existentialists Sartre and Beauvoir. And on the other hand, you get some philosophers who claim that that category is so broad that it ceases to pick out any meaningful similarities between the thinkers, because although they share similar preoccupations, they wrote from very different contexts and they came to radically different conclusions. So on the other hand, you get this narrow approach to defining existentialism, which has appeared in the work of Jonathan Weber more recently. And he says that we need to understand existentialism as a theory of value, which says that freedom is what is valuable, and as an ethical system which is built on that, which says that we must treat other people in a way that acknowledges the freedom of each person and the structure of human existence. And that view is something that emerged with Sartre and Beauvoir in the 1940s. My own view is that Sartre and Beauvoir were reinterpreting long-standing traditions that predate them, and they were engaging with philosophers who are now little known. So, for example, in the 1930s, there was a school of thought called Personalism, one of the leading figures of which was Emmanuel Meunier, and he also said that freedom was a central component of human life. And Sartre and Beauvoir, they contributed to this discussion in French philosophy an atheistic ethics. And at the time, in the sort of the interwar period, France was receiving the philosophy of Nietzsche, for example. And many atheist thinkers were beginning to ask questions about the meaning of life and the possibility of ethics in a world without God. And one of the things that I think that Sartre and Beauvoir did in a very creative and distinctive way was to take these questions and to try to give an answer to the nihilist who thought that you couldn't arrive at any values or any meaning for human life. And it was a particularly profound point to be making in the context of the Second World War. Existentialism, if you take it as this theory about freedom and ethics, emerges in the mid-1940s. And one of the things that Sartre and Beauvoir both did was that they wrote fiction. So they wrote plays and novels because they thought that the truth couldn't just be expressed in the form of philosophical treatises, especially where ethical matters are concerned. It's important to show the unfolding of ethical lives, or especially unethical lives, in people's dialogues with one another. So they used different literary forms, including theater and novels, to express their philosophy in more imaginatively engaging ways. And so part of the reason that they came to such prominence is because they weren't just writing 1,000-page books on phenomenological ontology. So Being in Nothingness was literally a 1-kilogram book. There's a rumor that's told about it that during the war, that butchers were buying the book to use when they were weighing out meat. So it's a large and jargon-dense and difficult book. that by itself wasn't going to make existentialism an international phenomenon. But applying the philosophy to these questions about human life is something that they did in fiction to great effect. And that really did launch them both into the international literary scene. One of the things that I think is important to remember about France during that period is that after the war, there were two purges of intellectuals and journalists and leaders in France because of the complicity of some of them with the occupation. There was the illegal purge, in which thousands of people were killed without trial. And then there was the legal purge, in which trials were conducted and people's guilt was established and consequences were meted out accordingly. And a lot of the leading voices in France at the time consequently disappeared from the stage. And there was a real a vacuum of thought and of leadership, of intellectual leadership. So Sartre and Beauvoir were both well posed to enter into this vacuum, and together they founded the journal Le Temps Moderne, which ran until just a couple of years ago, in fact, in France as a journal of the left. And so it's certainly the case that they were part of a big moment. But the historical context of existentialism, I think it shouldn't be taken as a kind of, well, you know, this philosophy wouldn't have been meaningful if it hadn't been for that context, because the fact of the matter is that people continue to read existentialists and to find their thought inspiring.